These young women went missing between July of 2007 and September of 2010. For the next 13 years, their cases went unsolved. Until today.
Rex Heuermann.
Rex Heuermann.
Rex Heuermann.
Rex Heuermann.
Rex Heuermann is now in custody.
Gilgo Beach has been used to discard human remains for some time.
This is the perfect place to dump a body.
They found another one. Fremont really scared me.
Body count, body count, body count.
People in our area are starting to get nervous.
We're anxious to have this over with.
And that's when I remember the police commissioner saying for the first time,
We could have a serial killer.
Her last phone call was to 911.
If not for Shannon Gilbert, these women would not have been found.
Find this killer before he strikes and hurts and murders someone you love.
He had over 200 searches pertaining to the Gilgo investigation.
And now, a bombshell development.
Bringing the mystery that stumped police and the public to an end.
He is, in fact, the Gilgo Beach serial killer.
She was 15 years old when the phone rang. The number on the screen was her sister's. She answered because, of course, she answered. Her sister had been missing for a week, and every time that phone rang, her heart went with it, up into her throat, hoping. But the voice on the other end was not her sister. It was a man, a calm man, a man who spoke to a grieving 15-year-old child with the casual confidence of someone who had nothing to fear and nowhere to be. He called again the next day, and the day after that. For 5 weeks he called. Each time the words got darker, each time the cruelty went a little further, and then one evening, in the final call, he told the child exactly what had happened to her sister, told her she was dead, and told her, with a steadiness that should terrify you, that he was going to watch her rot. Then he hung up, drove home to his wife and daughter in his quiet suburban neighborhood, ate dinner, went to sleep. He had a name most people would never remember. He had a job. He paid taxes. Or at least he was supposed to. He coached no little league team and belonged to no civic club that anyone recalls, but he was the kind of man you pass on the street 100 times without a second glance. A commuter, a professional, a neighbor. The kind of man whose name, when it finally appeared on the front page of every newspaper in the country, made people in his neighborhood say the same 5 words. But he seemed so normal. On his computer, hidden inside a file no one was supposed to find, investigators discovered a document. Not a diary, not a confession. Something colder than both. A planning document. A working document. It contained supply lists, location notes, and step-by-step instructions he had written to himself. Instructions he apparently revisited and updated over the years. Near the bottom, among the reminders to destroy evidence and eliminate traces of his presence, was a single line that stopped investigators cold. 6 words written in the same matter-of-fact tone as everything else on the page. 6 words that reveal more about the mind behind this case than anything spoken in any courtroom. Consider a hit to the neck next time. Not a confession of guilt, not a cry for help, a performance note, a self-correction, the observation of a man who had already done something terrible and was thinking carefully about how to do it better. And this man, this architect, this husband, when this father who drove the same commute every morning past the highway where he buried his victims, did this for 33 years, 33 years across 2 different centuries. He watched investigations stall. He watched families grieve on the news. He typed his own name into a search engine at least 200 times to check whether anyone was getting close. And every single morning, he got in his truck and went to work. What you are about to hear is the full story of the Gilgo Beach murders. One of the longest-running and most deeply disturbing serial killing cases in American history. It involves 8 women whose names deserve to be spoken out loud. And it involves a police chief who actively protected a killer by locking the FBI out of the investigation for 3 years. A police chief who had his own reasons for not wanting that particular investigation to succeed. It involves a wrongful conviction that may still be rotting inside a prison cell in upstate New York. And it involves a confession delivered in 30 minutes in a packed courtroom by a man who sounded, according to a reporter, sitting 10 feet away, like he was running through the agenda of a routine business meeting. Before we go any further, this case contains details that are genuinely disturbing. The nature of what was done to these women, what was done to their families in the aftermath, and what was found inside that house in Massapequa Park is not easy to sit with. If you are sensitive to graphic descriptions of violence or the targeting of vulnerable people, please take care as you watch. For everyone else, welcome to the Whispered Crimes. Today's case, the Gilgo Beach murders and the confession of Rex Andrew Heuermann. If you are new here, this channel exists for exactly this kind of story. The cases that demand to be told in full, with every name spoken and every detail verified. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you never miss a case, and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from right now. We have viewers on every continent, and we want to know where you are. There is a highway on the southern shore of Long Island, New York, that most people have never driven and would have no reason to. It runs along a thin strip of barrier island between the Atlantic Ocean and the bay, flanked on both sides by dense coastal brush that grows wild and thick and tall enough to swallow a person whole. In the daytime, it is unremarkable. At night, it is almost completely dark. There are no streetlights for long stretches, no houses visible from the road, no reason to slow down. Most people just pass through. For 8 women, that highway was the last place anyone would ever see them. This is their story first, not the killer's story, not the investigation story, not the courtroom story. Because before there was an arrest, before there was a confession, before there were headlines and documentaries, and a guilty plea entered exactly 1,000 days after the handcuffs went on, there were 8 women who left their families and never came back. 8 women with names and dreams and children who are still growing up in the shape of their absence. This chapter belongs to them and to no one else. It begins, as so much of this case does, with a woman who was not even one of his victims. Shannon Maria Gilbert was 24 years old, born and raised in Jersey City, New Jersey. She had a restless, searching quality to her. She wanted to act. She wanted a stage. She wanted a future that looked nothing like the one she had started with. To support herself while she worked towards something better, she advertised escort services on Craigslist. On the night of April the 30th into the early morning of May 1st, 2010, she was driven by her security man, Michael Pack, to the home of a client named Joseph Brewer in Oak Beach, a small gated community on Jones Beach Island on Long Island's South Shore. Neither Gilbert nor Pack had ever met Brewer before. Neither of them knew the area. She arrived, she went inside, and at exactly 4:51 in the morning, something changed. She called 911 from inside Brewer's home. Her voice, captured on a recording that Suffolk County police would fight against releasing for 12 years, moved in the space of seconds from calm to terrified. "There is somebody after me," she told the dispatcher. She said it over and over. She could not calm down. She could not tell the dispatcher exactly where she was. Outside Brewer's home, a neighbor named Gus Coletti also called 911, telling the dispatcher there was a young girl running around screaming in the street. A second neighbor, Barbara Brennan, called too. "A woman is knocking on my door," she said. "She is saying she is in danger." Shannon's call lasted 22 minutes. Then she fled into the marshlands surrounding Oak Beach, ran into the darkness, and was never seen alive again. Police searched for Shannon Gilbert for months without finding her. And 7 months after she vanished, in December 2010, a search team moved along a desolate stretch of Ocean Parkway near Gilgo Beach. They were still looking for her. They were not expecting what they found. On December 11th, 2010, Suffolk County police officer John Malia was running a cadaver dog training exercise along the roadside brush of Ocean Parkway. His dog, Blue, stopped at a cluster of thick coastal brush and would not move. Inside, wrapped in camouflage-patterned burlap and left in the undergrowth like something discarded, were the skeletal remains of a young woman. She was identified as Melissa Barthelemy, 24 years old, originally from Erie County, New York. She had been missing since July 2009. She was the first. 2 days later, on December 13th, 2010, investigators returned to that same stretch of highway and searched further along its length. Within a half-mile, they found 3 more sets of remains, all bound in burlap, all left in the same roadside brush, all petite, all in their 20s, all had been advertising escort services on Craigslist. All had gone missing between 2007 and 2010. Their names were Maureen Brainard-Barnes, Megan Waterman, and Lynn Costello. 4 women buried along the same strip of road, left in the same manner by the same hands. The press would call them the Gilgo Four. Their families had been waiting years for news, and nobody yet had any idea how much deeper this went. Before the Gilgo Four, before December 2010, there were others, earlier, but killed further from that highway in some cases, but connected to the same violence, the same method, and the same man. Sandra Costilla was 28 years old, originally from Trinidad and Tobago, living in New York City. She had come to America looking for a life, the way so many people do, carrying the particular hope of someone who has crossed an ocean to get somewhere better. On November 19th and 20th, 1993, 17 years before the Gilgo Four were found on Ocean Parkway, hunters walking through a stretch of woodland in the North Sea hamlet of Southampton on Long Island's South Fork found her body. She had been strangled and left among the trees as if she were nothing more than something to be disposed of. No investigation ever led anywhere conclusive. No suspect was publicly named. For years, her case sat cold and disconnected. He filed in one county while the Gilgo Beach case sat in another. It was not until advances in DNA science finally drew the line, 31 years after her body was found, that her murder was officially connected to the same man who killed the others. She was his first known victim. She was 28 years old, and for 3 decades, no one who loved her had an answer. Karen Vergata was 34 years old, and she lived in the Hell's Kitchen neighborhood of Manhattan. She worked as an escort. She was a woman with a father who loved her, a father named Dominic who last heard his daughter's voice on his own birthday. The date was Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1996. She did not call again after that. He waited. He worried. He hired a private detective because he was the kind of father who did not stop looking simply because the looking became hard. He followed every lead he could find and found nothing that brought her back. In April 1996, 2 months after that final birthday phone call, a set of severed legs were discovered in a plastic bag on Blue Point Beach on Fire Island. They were not identified. They were cataloged as unidentified remains and filed away. 15 years passed. Then on April 12, 2011, during an expanded search of the Ocean Parkway corridor, a skull was recovered near Tobay Beach in Nassau County. DNA analysis connected the skull to the legs found on Fire Island. Genetic genealogy finally gave those remains a name in August 2023. Nearly 27 years after Karen Vergata vanished from Hell's Kitchen. She leaves behind 2 sons who grew up without their mother and a father who spent years refusing to believe the search was over. Valerie Mack was 24 years old, a mother working as an escort in the Philadelphia area. She was last seen alive by her family in Port Republic, New Jersey, sometime in the autumn of the year 2000. She was never reported missing. On November 19, 2000, a hunter's dog found a black plastic bag in the woods of Manorville, Long Island. Inside the bag, bound with rope and wrapped in duct tape, was a decapitated body. Both hands had been severed. One leg had been removed. The remains were taken in by investigators, cataloged, and filed under the name they gave her, Jane Doe No. 6. For 20 years, that was all she was, a number. Additional remains connected to Jane Doe No. 6 were found on April 4, 2011, along Ocean Parkway, during the expanded search of the Gilgo Beach corridor. It was not until May 28, 2020, 20 years after she was killed, that forensic DNA advances finally gave her back her name, Valerie Mack. She leaves behind her adoptive parents and a son. His name was tattooed near her right ankle, close to her skin, where she could carry him with her wherever she went. Jessica Taylor was 20 years old and she was living in Manhattan, working near the Port Authority bus terminal. Between July 18th and 22nd, 2003, she was last seen in that area. On July 26, 2003, a local woman was walking her dog along a paved access road off Halsey Manor Road in Manorville, Long Island, just north of the Long Island Expressway. The dog found something. Atop a pile of scrap wood at the end of that road were the remains of a torso, later identified as belonging to Jessica Taylor. Whoever had left her there had deliberately mutilated a tattoo on her body using a sharp instrument, an attempt to prevent identification that ultimately failed, because Jessica Taylor's identity was established that same year through DNA analysis. Her skull, her hands, and her forearm were found 8 years later, on March 29, 2011, along Ocean Parkway, during the same expanding search that kept pulling new names out of that corridor of brush and silence. Her mother, Elizabeth Baxkill, spent years not knowing who had taken her daughter. She was in the courtroom at Suffolk County Court in Riverhead, New York, on April 8, 2026, and she said afterward that the guilty plea took a big chunk of stress off her family and that she accepted it wholeheartedly. Maureen Brainard-Barnes was 25 years old. She was from Norwich, Connecticut, and she was a mother of 2 children who needed her. She was petite, 4 feet 11 inches tall, 105 pounds, and she carried a life that had not been without struggle. She was working as an escort, operating out of a Super 8 motel in Manhattan, trying to keep her head above water. On the night of July 9, 2007, she called a friend back home in Connecticut from that motel and said she was about to go out to meet a client. That was the last call she ever made. Her body was found wrapped in burlap on December 13, 2010, along Ocean Parkway, among the remains of the other women who would become the Gilgo Four. She had been missing for 3 years by the time her family learned where she was. Her sister, Melissa Cann, spent 19 years carrying the grief of not knowing, and then 19 more years carrying the grief of knowing. On April 8, 2026, standing outside a courthouse in Riverhead, New York, she said, "This has been a long journey of hope. Today, that long, painful journey brings us to this moment. Our promise to Maureen is finally met with accountability." Melissa Barthelemy was 24 years old. She had grown up in Buffalo, New York, the oldest daughter of Lynn Barthelemy, and she had a younger stepsister named Amanda Funderburg whom she was close to. The kind of close that means shared secrets and regular calls and the certainty that the other person is always there. Melissa earned her cosmetology certificate and moved to a basement apartment in the Bronx with the specific hope of landing a job in a nice salon. She was building something. On July 12, 2009, she told a friend she was going out to meet a man. She deposited $900 into her bank account. She tried to call an ex-boyfriend who did not pick up. Her mother reported her missing on July 18, 2009. 1 week after Melissa disappeared, the calls started. A man with Melissa's phone called her stepsister Amanda. Amanda was 15 years old. When the phone rang and she saw her sister's name on the screen, she answered immediately. Because of course she answered. Her sister had been missing for a week. The voice on the other end was not her sister's. It was a man's voice. Flat, monotone, deliberate. Amanda later described it to investigators as the voice of a middle-aged white man with a strong New York, Long Island accent. He called 7 times over the following weeks. Each call was brief, deliberately under 3 minutes, placed from crowded public locations in Manhattan, from areas near Penn Station, Madison Square Garden, Times Square, places where the signal could not be easily traced back to a single person. The calls were designed to be untraceable. They were also designed to cause maximum damage to a 15-year-old girl. He refused to speak to anyone except Amanda. When Melissa's mother, Lynn Barthelemy, picked up the phone, he hung up. He waited until he had the teenager on the line. He called her by name. He told her he knew what she looked like. He spoke to her in graphic, vulgar detail about what he had done to her sister. He called Melissa a prostitute. He told Amanda things no child should ever hear. And in the final call, made on August 26, 2009, he told Amanda that he was watching her sister rot. Present tense, watching, as in, right now. As in, I can see her. Amanda Funderburg was 15 years old. She was a child, and the man on the other end of the line had just murdered her sister, driven home along his own familiar commute route from Midtown Manhattan to a quiet suburb on Long Island, and picked up the phone to torment the one person in that family he had decided to target. Megan Waterman was 22 years old, born and raised in Scarborough, Maine. She had a daughter named Liliana, who was 3 years old in June 2010 when Megan left for Long Island. Megan called home every single day without exception because Liliana was 3 years old, and Megan did not let a day pass without hearing her voice. On June 6, 2010, surveillance footage from the Holiday Inn Express in Hoboken, New York, she captured Megan leaving the hotel alone at approximately 1:15 in the morning to meet a client. Her family knew something was wrong before the day was over because the calls had stopped. Megan Waterman, who loved her daughter with a specific daily devotion that showed itself in phone calls made without fail, was found wrapped in burlap on Ocean Parkway in December 2010. She was 22 years old. Liliana Waterman is 19 years old now. She grew up in the shadow of a phone that stopped ringing. She grew up typing her mother's name into a search engine in elementary school because nobody had told her the full story yet, and reading things no child should have to read about someone she barely got to know. She was at the courthouse in Riverhead on April 8, 2026. She told reporters she was very, very thankful. Amber Lynn Costello was 27 years old and she lived in West Babylon, Long Island. On September 2, 2010, she left her home to meet a man who had been calling her repeatedly, who had offered her $2,500, and who her roommate Dave Schaller would later describe to investigators as ogre-like in appearance, insistent on the phone and driving a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche, a model so uncommon on Long Island that it could be tracked down through vehicle registration records. That single observation from one witness, sitting in a case file for years before anyone pulled the right thread, would eventually become the detail that unraveled everything. But that belongs to another chapter. What belongs here is this. Amber Lynn Costello was 27 years old. She left her home on a September night with a plan to come back. She never did. 8 women, 8 names, 8 families left in the shape of an absence that did not get smaller with time, and scattered along that same stretch of Ocean Parkway were others whose stories still have no resolution. In April 2025, Nassau County Police finally identified a woman and her 2-year-old daughter whose bodies had been found in that same corridor in 2011. Their names were Tanya Denise Jackson and her daughter Tatiana Marie Dykes. For years, she had been cataloged only as Jane Doe No. 3, given the nickname Peaches by investigators because of a fruit tattoo on her body. Nobody has been charged in their deaths, and among the remains found on April 4th, or 2011 was a set belonging to a person investigators have never been able to identify. A biological male of Asian descent, found wearing women's clothing, between 17 and 23 years old at the time of death, believed to have died in 2006 or earlier from blunt force trauma. Updated forensic sketches were released in September 2024. This person still has no name. Their case is still open. Somewhere 20 miles away from that highway, through all of those years, through every identification and every vigil and every family sitting in a police station being told the thing they had most feared. A man was going to work, putting on his suit, walking through Midtown Manhattan, typing his own name into a search engine more than 200 times to monitor how close anyone was getting. Chapter 2. The man, he drove past their bodies every morning. The house had not changed in 60 years. That is what childhood friends said when they drove past it after his arrest in July 2023. A classmate who had known him since Berner High School said it plainly. That house has not changed in 60 years. The shingles were still red, weathered, and peeling in places. There were piles of wood stacked on the porch and a woodworking bench sitting in the driveway. The lawn stood in visible contrast to the manicured properties surrounding it in what was otherwise an upscale Nassau County suburb. Neighbors had been commenting on the deterioration for years. Kids in the neighborhood avoided it at Halloween. One neighbor had jokingly remarked, years before any of this came to light, that Heuermann probably had bodies buried on the property. Rex Andrew Heuermann was born on September 13, 1963, in that house at 105 First Avenue, Massapequa Park, New York, a quiet village on Long Island's South Shore, barely 20 miles from the stretch of Ocean Parkway, where he buried 8 women. He grew up in it. He attended his classes, came home, grew into an adult, and in 1994, when he was 30 years old, he purchased that same childhood home from his mother for $170,000 and went on living there. The same red ranch, the same address, the same dilapidated walls, until the night of July 13th, 2023, when law enforcement surrounded him on a Manhattan street and walked him away in handcuffs. He never really left. He stayed in the house where he grew up, a few miles across the bay from the bodies. His parents were Theodore and Dolores Heuermann. His father, Theodore, was a World War II veteran, a former second lieutenant in the United States Air Force, and a man who taught his son to build furniture by hand, a hobby Rex maintained for the rest of his life, the woodworking bench in the driveway, a visible remnant of it. Theodore Heuermann died in 1975 when Rex was 12 years old. Childhood acquaintances described Rex as unusually close to his mother, whom they characterized as controlling. A classmate who grew up near him recalled that Rex had clashes with his father before the death, that the father was hard on Rex for not being what the father wanted him to be. And then the father was gone when Rex was 12, and the boy became the man of the house, with a controlling mother and no way out except inward. He attended Alfred G. Berner High School in Massapequa Park, where he graduated in 1981 as part of a class that also included the actor Billy Baldwin. When Baldwin woke up on the morning of July 14, 2023, and learned who had been arrested in connection with the Gilgo Beach murders, he posted immediately on social media. He wrote, "Woke up this morning to learn that the Gilgo Beach serial killer suspect was my high school classmate, Rex Heuermann. Berner High School, Massapequa, New York, class of 1981. Married, 2 kids, architect, average guy, quiet, family man, mind-boggling. Massapequa is in shock. That is the portrait everyone held of him. Average guy, quiet, family man." He went on to earn his bachelor's degree from the New York Institute of Technology and built a career as an architectural consultant and expeditor, a specialist in navigating New York City building regulations, guiding developers and clients through the bureaucracy of permits, codes, and inspections. He described himself in a 2022 video interview as a troubleshooter. Born and raised on Long Island, he said, and working in Manhattan since 1987. When a job that should have been routine suddenly becomes not routine, I get the phone call. In 1994, the same year he bought his mother's house, the same year investigators would later establish his collection of violent pornography began, he founded RH Consultants and Associates. The firm's office was at 385 Fifth Avenue in Midtown Manhattan, 2 blocks north of the Empire State Building. His clients over the years included Target, Nike, Foot Locker, Catholic Charities, and American Airlines. He commuted to that office every morning from Massapequa Park by train, along the same corridor the burner phones traveled on the nights he killed. He had been married once before. His first marriage to a woman named Elizabeth Ryan ended in divorce in 1991. In April 1996, he married Asa Ellerup, a woman of Icelandic descent who had herself been previously married to a man named Christopher Sheridan. Asa had a son from that marriage, Christopher, who became Rex's stepson and carried his biological father's surname, Sheridan. Christopher had developmental disabilities. His mother later told reporters that when news of Rex's arrest broke, Christopher was so distraught he could not understand what was happening. As a mother, she said, I have no answers for him. Rex and Asa's biological daughter, Victoria, was born in 1996 and would go on to work alongside her father at the architecture firm right up until the day he was arrested. By every external measure, this was an ordinary household. A father who built furniture in the driveway and commuted to the city every day. 2 children growing up in a quiet Long Island village. Neighbors described Rex as withdrawn but unremarkable. A tall, well-dressed man who walked to the train in the morning and never really bothered anybody. His daughter called him an open book. It was no secret he hunted, she said in a later documentary. It was no secret he had guns. And then the first fact that begins to crack that picture open, investigators confirmed that Heuermann's wife and children were out of state during each of the periods when the killings are believed to have occurred. He used their absence as his window. The family took vacations he declined to join. A trip to Atlantic City in July 2007, a trip to Iceland in July 2009. Both trips coincided with murders he has since confessed to committing. While his family was away, he drove his Chevrolet Avalanche across the causeway, spanning South Oyster Bay, reached the barrier island, and did what he had been planning to do. Then he drove back to 105 First Avenue and waited for his family to return. And then the arrest came, and with it, the world these 3 people had lived in collapsed completely. Our Asa Ellerup filed for divorce within days of his July 2023 arrest. The divorce was finalized in March 2025, Before the arrest, Heuermann had owned 3 properties, including a 5+ acre parcel in South Carolina near his brother Craig, where he had planned to retire. After the arrest, Ace and the children began planning to relocate there. The family home on First Avenue went on the market. In August 2023, Ellerup's attorney revealed that she had been battling breast and skin cancer for several years and required 12 to 18 more months of treatment. She was at risk of losing the health insurance she received through her estranged husband's architecture business. She was going through a very difficult time, her attorney said, not only emotionally, but with the cancer and this new life she had to come to terms with. Victoria Heuermann appeared in the Peacock documentary The Gilgo Beach Killer, House of Secrets, which aired in June 2025. During filming, when asked directly whether she believed her father was guilty, she said on camera, "Whether or not I believe my dad did it or not, I am on the fence about that. Part of me thinks he did not do it, but at the same time, I do not know. He could have just totally had a double life." Then a week before the documentary aired, she communicated a different position privately to the production team. At the close of the final episode, producers displayed a written statement on screen. It read, "Based on publicly available facts that have been presented and explained to her, she now believes her father is most likely the Gilgo Beach killer." The statement was not made on camera. It was passed to producers off-screen shortly before the world was about to see the documentary she had agreed to participate in. His best friend and a Port Washington architect named David Jimenez, who had bonded with Rex over a shared love of guns and conservative politics, visited him in jail after the arrest. He described the visit in the same documentary. He said to Rex, "Did you do it?" And then Rex teared up a little bit and started crying. And that, Jimenez said, was when he got the feeling that he did. Now the other life, the one that existed entirely in the space between what the family knew and what was actually happening. Rex Heuermann operated under the alias Thomas Hawk. He used that name to contact dozens of sex workers over the years, to arrange meetings through Craigslist and other platforms, and to accumulate what prosecutors described as an extensive collection of torture pornography, material dating back to at least 1994, including images of mutilation and women bound with rope, consistent with injuries found on his victims. Court records confirm he also conducted thousands of searches on his devices related to sex workers, sadistic material, and child pornography. Among the search terms found was a question he had typed out and read the answer to, and apparently needed to revisit more than 200 times. Why hasn't the Long Island serial killer been caught? He was searching for reassurance about himself. He wanted to know how close anyone was. He was also searching for photographs of his victims. Photographs of their children, their siblings, their parents. Thought he was compiling information on their relatives and attempting to track family members down by name. He watched the grief he had caused from the other side of a computer screen, returning to it regularly, feeding something in himself that the architecture work in the furniture building and the daily commute apparently could not satisfy on its own. And inside the house, in the basement where his family kept childhood memories, gun supplies, and family heirlooms, investigators found a steel vault. Inside the vault were 279 weapons. On his computer, buried in files that looked like ordinary work documents, they found a blueprint. Not a diary, not a confession, a working document maintained and revised over the years, containing lists of supplies he would need for each killing, the specific locations of his dump sites, Wang's step-by-step operational notes about limiting noise, cleaning the bodies, and destroying evidence. A reminder to burn his gloves, and one line, written in the same calm, methodical hand as everything else around it. Consider a hit to the neck next time. Not remorse, not guilt. A performance note. The self-correction of a man who had already murdered someone and was already thinking, with complete clarity and no apparent distress, about how to do it better next time. By the time investigators finally came for him, they had amassed 120 terabytes of data and 7,015 pages of evidence. Inside that evidence was the portrait of a man who had maintained 2 completely separate lives for 30 years. From the same dilapidated red house, a few miles across the bay from the highway, where he left 8 women. Or 3 miles from where he had dumped 2 of those women, another story was already running in parallel. One so entangled with this case that it may never be fully separated. John Bittrolff was a carpenter from Manorville, Long Island. In July 2014, he was charged with the 1993 murder of Rita Tangradi, 31, found beaten and strangled in East Patchogue, and the 1994 murder of Colleen McNamee, 20, found in a wooded area along William Floyd Parkway in Shirley. His DNA was identified through a partial match from his brother Timothy's sample, submitted after an unrelated arrest. On July 5, 2017, Bittrolff was convicted of both murders and sentenced to 50 years to life. He is currently incarcerated at Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York. For years, Bittrolff had also been the primary suspect in Sandra Costilla's 1993 murder, the same murder Rex Heuermann later confessed to. When Heuermann was charged with Costilla's killing in June 2024, new DNA testing detected male DNA on evidence from McNamee's case that did not match Bittrolff. His legal team filed a motion to vacate both convictions. That motion is still active. Bittrolff is still in that prison. The question of whether Suffolk County convicted the wrong man for 2 murders while the right man was 20 miles away, building furniture in his driveway and tracking the investigation on his computer, remains officially unanswered. To understand why a serial killer who buried 8 women 20 miles from his own house went uncaught for 33 years, you have to understand the structure of power in Suffolk County, New York in the years immediately after those bodies were found. And to understand that structure, you have to understand the relationship between 2 men and how far back it went. Thomas Spota was the Suffolk County District Attorney. He had wielded power in that county for 16 years. James Burke had known Spota since Burke was a teenager in the late 1970s, when he served as a star witness in a murder case that Spota was prosecuting. That bond, forged when Burke was still a boy, never broke. Spota later hired Burke as an investigator in his own office. When the position of Suffolk County Police Chief came open in 2012, Spota vouched for Burke personally, and County Executive Steve Bellone appointed him. A 4-rank jump that critics noted immediately, given what was already documented in Burke's personnel file, or because the file was not clean. A 1995 internal affairs probe had found that Burke had a personal sexual relationship with a convicted felon known to be actively involved in drug dealing and prostitution, and had engaged in sex acts in police vehicles while on duty and in uniform. Rather than facing discipline, Burke had received promotions. Spota ran interference, Bellone trusted Spota's judgment, and so James Burke became the highest-ranking uniformed officer in the Suffolk County Police Department, one of the 15 largest in the country, with more than 2,000 officers. Burke was appointed in January 2012, less than 9 months after the search for Shannon Gilbert had led to the discovery of the first Gilgo Beach bodies, and just over 2 weeks after investigators had finally found Gilbert's own remains in the marsh at Oak Beach. This was the most critical window in the entire investigation. Bodies had just been found. Evidence was relatively fresh. The FBI was already engaged, and one of Burke's first acts in that role was to begin working to remove the FBI from the case entirely. Detective Rob Trotta, who was assigned to the FBI Violent Crimes Task Force at the time, later described what followed in documentary testimony that is difficult to hear without feeling the weight of what was allowed to happen. Burke denied subpoenas for cell phone tower records directly relevant to the Gilgo Beach investigation. Burke issued a department-wide directive ordering every officer to notify a supervisor whenever they were contacted by any outside law enforcement agency. Geraldine Hart, senior agent with the Long Island Division of the FBI, said it was apparent that Burke and Spota did not want the FBI involved at any level. Timothy Sinai, who became police commissioner in 2015, later confirmed that detectives had been specifically blocked from sharing information with the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, the precise unit that profiles serial killers. That was the doing of Tom Spota and James Burke, Sinny said. Try to put the central absurdity plainly. You have a serial murderer killing prostitutes on Long Island, and your police chief is a guy who patronizes prostitutes, because that was also documented. The 1995 file, the escort who, in 2016 after his federal conviction, accused Burke of hiring her for a drug-fueled party on Long Island. And those were not the only abuses of power on record during his tenure. Prosecutors later established at sentencing that Burke kept liquor in his office and regularly drove drunk. He had subordinates conduct illegal surveillance on his girlfriends. In 2013, he had a contractor secretly place a GPS tracking device on a high-ranking civilian police official he disliked, hoping to gather material he could use for blackmail. Prosecutors called his time as chief a reign of terror. What finally brought Burke down had nothing to do with Gilgo Beach. On December 14, 2012, a man named Christopher Loeb was arrested for breaking into Burke's unlocked, department-issued GMC Yukon, parked in St. James, and stealing a bag containing Burke's gun belt, ammunition, a box of cigars, a humidor, pornography, and sex toys. When Loeb was taken into custody and brought to the 4th Precinct Station House in Smithtown, he was handcuffed and chained by an eye bolt fastened to the interrogation room floor. Burke entered the room. He allegedly punched and kicked Loeb in the head and body. He threatened to kill Loeb by ensuring he received a hot shot, a lethal dose of heroin, knowing Loeb was an addict. At least one detective present also choked Loeb and threatened members of his family. Burke then allowed himself, the purported crime victim, to enter Loeb's home during the evidence search and remove his own bag before it was inventoried, contaminating the scene and protecting himself from further embarrassment. Days later, Burke bragged about the beating to fellow officers at a department Christmas party, saying it reminded him of his old days as a young police officer. He referred to the detectives who had watched him beat a handcuffed prisoner as his palace guards. Then came the cover-up. Burke summoned the witnesses to his office to get their stories straight. A union official falsely told several officers that Burke and other senior law enforcement figures had secretly obtained copies of FBI memos containing the names of people who were speaking with investigators. One officer told a federal agent that if that were true, he was a dead man. As a result, officers who had been present at the beating or heard Burke brag about it at the Christmas party stayed silent for years. One lied under oath in court and testified that the attack had never happened. Spada's office orchestrated the defense at every turn. The same bond that had elevated Burke to chief was now being used to protect him from the federal accountability. When the federal investigation was initially closed due to obstruction, Burke and Spada believed they had won. They had not. The FBI reopened the probe. In 2015, federal prosecutors finally moved. Burke resigned, then was arrested and arraigned on December 9, 2015. He pleaded guilty to violating Christopher Loeb's civil rights and to conspiracy to obstruct justice. In November 2016, he was sentenced to 46 months in federal prison. The sentencing judge, Leonard Wexler, told the courtroom he felt Burke had acted as a dictator. He also noted the corruption of an entire department by this defendant is shocking. Burke began serving his sentence at Federal Correctional Institution Allenwood Low in Pennsylvania in January 2017. He was released to house arrest in November 2018 and completed his sentence in April 2019, having served 40 months. Thomas Spada and the chief of his anti-corruption bureau, Christopher McPartland, were convicted in December 2019 on charges of witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy for their roles in covering up the assault. Both received 5-year federal prison sentences. Both are convicted felons. The day of Burke's December 2015 arrest, the Suffolk County Deputy Commissioner announced that the FBI would finally join the Gilgo Beach investigation, 4 full years after the first bodies had been found along Ocean Parkway, and Burke still was not finished. In August 2023, while Rex Heuermann sat in jail awaiting trial, Burke was arrested at Vietnam Veterans Memorial Park in Farmingville, Long Island. He had allegedly exposed himself to a male plainclothes park ranger and solicited a sex act. He was charged with public lewdness, indecent exposure, offering a sex act, and criminal solicitation. As rangers took him into custody, Burke asked them if they knew who he was. He told them that getting arrested would be a public humiliation for him. The ranger who arrested him did not recognize him. State Senator Rob Trotta said it without hedging. I have no doubt that Jim Burke, being police chief at the time, caused the delay in the arrest of Mr. Heuermann for 13 years. Even after Burke's removal and the FBI's formal entry into the case, it barely moved. In January 2020, Police Commissioner Geraldine Hart publicly released photographs of a black leather belt found near Ocean Parkway, embossed with the initials HM or WH. Investigators believed the killer had handled it. Tips came in. No arrest followed. By 2021, Robert Kolker's 2013 book, Lost Girls, had become a Netflix film. Multiple documentaries had aired. Podcasts had covered every known angle. The whole world knew the name Gilgo Beach. Nobody knew the killer's name. Then in February 2022, new Suffolk County Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison formed a multi-agency task force. The Suffolk County Police Department, the Suffolk County Sheriff's Office, the New York State Police, and the FBI. They began reviewing more than a decade of accumulated evidence with fresh eyes and unrestricted access. 6 weeks later, on March 14, 2022, a New York State investigator working through a database identified Rex Heuermann as a possible suspect. 6 weeks. That is all it took once the right people were finally allowed to work together without interference. The task force returned to the original witness reports. Amber Costello's roommate, Dave Schaller, had described her client as ogre-like, driving a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche, one of the rarest pickup models on Long Island, traceable through vehicle registration databases. The original investigators had already established that burner phone calls to all 4 Gilgo 4 victims had pinged cell towers within a few blocks of Massapequa Park. Working outward from the truck and the towers, investigators used credit card records and physical descriptions to narrow thousands of possible individuals down to hundreds, then dozens, then one name that kept surfacing. They needed his DNA, without his knowledge and without tipping him. On January 26, 2023, a surveillance team followed Heuermann in Midtown Manhattan and watched as he discarded a box of partially eaten pizza crusts into a sidewalk garbage can outside his office at 385 Fifth Avenue. They moved immediately, recovered the box, sent it directly to the Suffolk County Crime Laboratory. Then on May 19, 2023, investigators observed Heuermann on surveillance cameras at a T-Mobile store at 124 West 34th Street in Manhattan, purchasing additional minutes for one of his burner phones, the same type of prepaid phone used to contact his victims before they disappeared. On June 12, 2023, the forensic laboratory completed the DNA comparison. The profile extracted from the leftover pizza crust matched a male hair found wrapped in the burlap used to restrain and transport Megan Waterman's body. The match excluded 99.96% of the North American population. Rex Heuermann could not be excluded. 13 years. A pizza box. D.A. Tierney later described the strategy that held the investigation together during those final months of surveillance. We wanted the one person who mattered, the murderer, to think it was business as usual. The task force had issued more than 300 subpoenas and search warrants across the investigation. On July 13, 2023, during the evening rush hour in Midtown Manhattan, Heuermann walked out of his office at 385 Fifth Avenue and was surrounded by law enforcement officials in dark suits. Surveillance footage captured the moment of the arrest. And he was 59 years old. Investigators searched his home at 105 First Avenue, Massapequa Park for 12 consecutive days. Ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs worked the backyard. No remains were found there. But inside the basement, they discovered a walk-in vault containing 279 pistols and long guns. Heuermann held 92 legal handgun permits. The collection considerably exceeded them. Since his arrest, he has been held in near solitary confinement, 23 hours per day in protective custody at Suffolk County Jail in Riverhead. The charges came in stages. January 16, 2024, Maureen Brainard-Barnes. June 6, 2024, Jessica Taylor and Sandra Costilla, extending the confirmed killing timeline back to 1993. December 17, 2024, Valerie Mack. Then came the evidence battle. Heuermann's defense challenged the whole genome sequencing DNA technology, calling it magic, arguing the laboratory was not licensed in New York. On September 3, 2025, Judge Timothy Massey ruled it admissible. The first time such evidence had ever been allowed in a New York courtroom. That same month, Massey ruled all 7 murder charges would be tried together. Defense attorney Michael Brown later called the DNA ruling monumental and acknowledged that combining 7 murders into a single trial would have produced an overwhelming cumulative effect on any jury. Trial was set for September 2026. Prosecutors had prepared to call more than 100 witnesses. They had amassed 120 terabytes of data and 7,015 pages of evidence. On March 26, 2026, sources close to the case reported that Rex Heuermann intended to change his plea. For nearly 3 years, Rex Heuermann stood in courtrooms across Suffolk County and said not guilty. He said it for Melissa Barthelemy. He said it for Megan Waterman. He said it for Amber for Megan Waterman. He said it for Amber Lynn Costello. He said it for Maureen Brainard-Barnes, for Jessica Taylor, for Sandra Costilla, for Valerie Mack. 7 charges, 7 times. Stone-faced, suit-pressed, hands folded. He wanted his day in court, his attorney said. He wanted a trial. Then 5 months before that trial was set to begin, he reversed completely. His defense attorney, Michael Brown, spoke to reporters outside the courthouse and explained the calculus plainly. In terms of likelihood of success at trial, Brown said, the judge's ruling on the DNA admissibility hearing was monumental. Combining 7 murders into a single trial would have produced an overwhelming cumulative effect on any jury. Every legal avenue that could have been challenged had been closed. There was also the matter of 23 hours a day in solitary confinement at Riverhead for nearly 3 years. There was what a full public trial would have required. The blueprint, the torture archive, the 200 obsessive searches of his own investigation, weeks of that on display in open court in front of his daughter. And Brown offered one more framing. When you have that type of thing in your head and on your body, he said, I think by admitting it, it is cathartic to some extent. He described how the decision ultimately came. There came a point in this defense, Brown said, where Rex said he wanted to plead guilty. He certainly wanted to save the families of the victims the ordeal of going to trial, coupled with saving his family from that ordeal. When a reporter asked whether his client was sorry, Brown paused. I would hope so, he said. I would expect at sentencing he would have something to say. Wednesday, April 8, 2026, Suffolk County Court, Riverhead, New York, exactly 1,000 days after his arrest. Reporters had been lining up outside the courthouse since 5 in the morning. Every seat inside was filled. 2 overflow rooms were set up for additional observers. Law enforcement officers stood along every wall and window. In the gallery sat the families who had been waiting, in some cases since 1993. Mothers, sisters, daughters, keeping their eyes forward. Several sobbed quietly. Several wiped their faces. In the very back row, Sasa Ellerup sat beside her daughter Victoria. As Heuermann entered and the proceedings began, Ellerup leaned forward and gripped the back of the chair in front of her. Rex Heuermann walked in wearing a black suit coat and white button-down shirt. His hands were shackled behind his back. He said good morning to the prosecutor. He stood still. His face showed no expression. Judge Timothy Mazzei began the formal proceeding. He asked, after discussions with your lawyer, do you feel it is in your best interest to plead guilty rather than go to trial? Heuermann answered, yes, Your Honor. The judge noted both sides had been unbelievable lawyers. Heuermann agreed, yes, I am, when asked if he was satisfied with his representation. No elaboration. He kept his gaze fixed straight ahead. Then D.A. Ray Tierney took him through each killing, one at a time, in chronological order. Sandra Costilla, 1993. Heuermann confirmed he arranged to meet her, picked her up, and strangled her. Guilty. Karen Vergata, 1996. Heuermann admitted to intentionally causing her death by strangulation and to transporting her body. He was not formally charged with her murder. The admission came as a voluntary separate count, distinct from the 7 murder pleas. He would face no further prosecution for her death. Guilty. Valerie Mack, 2000. Strangulation confirmed. Dismemberment confirmed. Guilty. Jessica Taylor, 2003. Strangulation confirmed. Dismemberment confirmed. Guilty. Maureen Brainard-Barnes, 2007. Strangulation confirmed. Binding confirmed. Guilty. Melissa Barthelemy, 2009. Strangulation confirmed. Burlap wrapping confirmed. Guilty. Megan Waterman, 2010. Strangulation confirmed. Burlap wrapping confirmed. Guilty. Amber Lynn Costello, 2010. Strangulation confirmed. Burlap wrapping confirmed. Guilty. 7 formal murder pleas. One voluntary admission of an 8th killing, 8 women, 8 confirmations delivered in the same flat, unhurried tone. He did not look back at the gallery once. CBS News reporter Carolyn Gussoff, who was inside the courtroom, described what she heard. His voice was loud, confident, and utterly without emotion, rattling off the guilty pleas one after another. It sounded, she said, like he could have just been in an architecture meeting. The entire hearing lasted approximately 30 minutes. The expected sentence at the June 17th formal sentencing: 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole for Barthelemy, Waterman, and Costello, plus 100 years to life for Brainard-Barnes, to Taylor, Costilla, and Mack. He waived his right to appeal. He will never leave prison. Outside the courthouse, Suffolk County Police Commissioner Kevin Catalina said, "Today he was exposed for exactly what he is, a sadistic, soulless, murderous monster. To the families, no one can ever replace the lives that were taken, but we hope that this brings some measure of solace." D.R.A. Tierney spoke at a packed news conference held in the gymnasium of the Suffolk County Police Academy. He said, "This defendant walked among us, play acting as a normal suburban dad when, in reality all along, he was obsessively targeting innocent women for death. He thought that by killing them, he could silence them forever and get away with murder. But he was wrong, say, because it was these victims, these women, who refused to stay silent." Melissa Cann, a sister of Maureen Brainard-Barnes, stood at a microphone fighting back tears and said, "This has been a long journey of hope. Hope that one day we would stand here and say her name with justice beside it. Today, that long, painful journey brings us to this moment. Our promise to Maureen has finally met with accountability." Elizabeth Baxkiel, mother of Jessica Taylor, said, "I am glad that this is over as far as him pleading guilty. It took a big chunk of stress off of me and my family." Liliana Waterman, 3 years old when her mother Megan was killed, 19 years old on April 8, 2026, said, "I am very, very thankful. This case does not end cleanly. 5 threads remain open, and every one of them matters." Shannon Gilbert. She disappeared on May 1st, 2010, after making a frantic 23-minute 911 call from a client's home in Oak Beach, and telling the dispatcher that people were trying to kill her. Her remains were found in December 2011 in Marshland, near where she was last seen. The official cause of death on her death certificate is listed as undetermined. Suffolk County investigators have long suggested she drowned accidentally after panicking in dense marsh reeds. The independent autopsy conducted by former New York Chief Medical Examiner, Dr. Michael Baden, found the evidence consistent with homicidal strangulation, based in part on damage to the hyoid bone in her neck. These two positions have never been officially reconciled. Outside the courthouse on April 8, 2026, a Michael Brown, who had previously suggested in court filings that whoever killed the Gilgo 4 also killed Gilbert, reversed completely and told reporters, "Rex Heuermann had nothing to do with Shannon Gilbert. Her death remains officially unresolved. No one has ever been charged." John Bitroff. A carpenter from Manorville convicted in 2017 of the murders of Rita Tangradi and Colleen McNamee, both killed in the early 1990s, sentenced to 50 years to life at Clinton Correctional Facility. On January 23, 2025, his legal team filed a formal motion to vacate both convictions, citing new DNA testing that detected male DNA on evidence from McNamee's case that did not match Bitroff. His team then requested Heuermann's DNA be compared to hair samples from both crime scenes. That comparison was performed, and the results excluded Heuermann as well. The identity of the unknown male DNA contributor on McNamee's evidence remains unidentified. Neither Bitroff's profile nor Heuermann's matches it. The motion to vacate is still active. Bitroff is still imprisoned, serving 50 years to life, while that question works its way through the courts. Asian Doe. A biological male of Asian descent found on Ocean Parkway on April 4, 2011, wearing women's clothing. Estimated to have died between 2002 and 2006. Updated forensic sketches released in September 2024. This person still has no name. Michael Brown confirmed outside the courthouse on April 8th that Heuermann maintains he has no connection to this victim whatsoever. Tanya Jackson and Tatiana Dykes. This is the thread that has changed the most recently and the most dramatically. Tanya Jackson was a 26-year-old Army veteran from Alabama. For 27 years, she was known only as Peaches, for a distinctive tattoo, until she was finally identified in April 2025. Her 2-year-old daughter Tatiana's remains were found on Ocean Parkway in 2011. For years, their killer was unknown. Then investigators obtained Tatiana's birth certificate, which listed the father as Andrew Dykes, a 66-year-old retired Army veteran and former state trooper from Ruskin, Florida. After surveillance, investigators recovered a plastic straw Dykes had discarded at a Charlie's Cheesesteaks restaurant in Tampa. His DNA matched samples from Jackson's remains. On December 3, 2025, Dykes was arrested. He was arraigned on December 18, 2025, charged with second-degree murder in Jackson's killing. He pleaded not guilty and was remanded. He has not been charged in Tatiana's death, though investigators and the Nassau County DA believe he is responsible for both. Nassau County Police Commissioner Patrick Ryder said at the arraignment, "He might have worn that uniform. He may have served, but he was a homicide subject. He's a murderer. He threw a baby out like trash into the weeds." Nassau County DO Ann Donnelly said, "Tanya didn't meet her end at the hands of a serial killer. She was a victim of a man she trusted. His trial is ongoing, and the FBI. As part of his plea agreement, Rex Heuermann must cooperate fully with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, described by DA Tierney as an academic and scientific exercise to understand what creates a man capable of this, what Heuermann knows, what connections he may offer, what he chose not to say on April 8, 2026, that belongs to a federal investigation that may run for years. Before we go, their names, all 8 of them: Sandra Costilla, 28 years old; Karen Vergata, 34 years old; Valerie Mack, 24 years old; Jessica Taylor, 20 years old; Maureen Brainard-Barnes, 25 years old; Melissa Barthelemy, 24 years old; Megan Waterman, 22 years old; Amber Lynn Costello, 27 years old. Every one of these women had a name before she had a case number. Everyone had a family that waited. If you did not know their names before today, that is exactly why this channel exists. Subscribe, hit the bell, share this video with someone who follows true crime. Every view is a reminder that these women are not forgotten. On June 17, 2026, Rex Heuermann will stand before Judge Timothy Mazzei for formal sentencing. His attorney says he will speak. The whispered crimes will be there.